Charter. This is a national undertaking about the future of our republic, about the development imperatives enshrined in the articles of our Constitution, the attainment of the Constitution's high development aspirations, and the opportunities we owe future generations as a result. This national conversation must rise above politics, transcend electoral cycles, and unite us around a shared 2030 shaped our national development priorities, informed public policy, catalyzed in the 60s and 80s. It involved the East Asian tigers, including South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, which transformed themselves into prosperous, high-income, industrialized economies. The second was in the late 1970s. China, together with Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Mauritius, embarked on bold economic reforms that lifted hundreds of millions of their citizens out of poverty and transformed their economies into globally competitive manufacturing and investment hubs. The third wave began in the early 90s. Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, and Cape Verde embraced reforms, expanded exports, attracted investments, and fundamentally changed the trajectory of their economies within one generation. All these major developments, but we did not take full advantage of them. In 1965, for example, Kenya and South Korea each had a GDP per capita of approximately $110. Today, South Korea exceeds $36,000 compared to ours of $2,400, a multiple of 15. When China began its economic reforms, its GDP per capita stood at approximately $200. Kenya's was then $450. China overtook us, and today has a GDP per capita exceeding $14,000, a multiple of 6 compared to ours. When Vietnam embarked on economic reforms in the early 90s, Vietnam's income per person was roughly half ours. Today, Vietnam's GDP per capita stands at approximately $5,000, more than double ours. Bangladesh has followed a similar remarkable path. Even more sobering is the fact we are now being challenged by countries much closer to home. Ghana's GDP per capita is about $3,200, roughly 30% higher than ours. While Zimbabwe, after enduring decades of profound economic hardship, has recovered to a GDP per capita of about $3,000, now slightly exceeding ours. The question we must ask ourselves candidly and honestly is why other nations have fulfilled so much of their potential while we have repeatedly fallen short. More importantly, what must we now do differently to ensure that the next chapter of Kenya's development story is fundamentally different from the last? Fellow citizens, there is, however, some good news. We can, we must, and we shall together get it right this time round. History rarely announces the arrival of defining moments. Yet there are occasions when the forces shaping the world create opportunities that come perhaps once in a generation. I believe we are on the threshold of one such historic moment. I believe so for 4 compelling reasons. First, 4 years ago, our priority as a nation was not to imagine Kenya's next chapter. It was to survive global economic turbulence, restore stability, rebuild confidence, and place our economy back on a firm foundation. Together, we achieved that. We have restored macroeconomic stability. We have stabilized our currency. We have rebuilt our foreign exchange reserves to over 15 billion US dollars, providing 6.5 months of import cover. Inflation has fallen. Borrowing costs have declined. Investor confidence has returned. Last year, for example, Kenya attracted a record $3.2 billion in foreign direct investment, more than double the amount recorded in 2022. The 2025 the World Competitiveness Ranking placed Kenya as the most competitive economy in Africa, reflecting the confidence our reforms have restored. Because we have restored stability, rebuilt investor confidence, and laid a firm foundation for our economy, now is the perfect opportunity for Kenya to begin shaping the next phase of our national development. That is why, in my State of the Nation address last year, I challenged us to begin thinking beyond the immediate demands of today and to start imagining a futuristic roadmap for our nation. That was not simply a call to dream. It was a call to prepare and an invitation to begin building the institutions that will support Kenya's long-term transformation. That journey has already begun. We have already established the National Infrastructure Fund to ensure the investments essential for Kenya's transformation are financed sustainably. It is also why we have established the Sovereign Wealth Fund to preserve and invest the wealth of our nation so that today's prosperity becomes tomorrow's opportunity, shared fairly between present and future generations. Together, these institutions represent more than new opportunities. They embody a philosophy of nation building, that lasting prosperity is built through institutions that outlive governments, inspire long-term investment, safeguard intergenerational wealth, and provide confidence in our economy. The second reason why I believe this is our moment is because our current roadmap is approaching its destination. Vision 2030 has brought us this far, but it is approaching its horizon. It has served Kenya well. It transformed the way we think about national development, provided a common direction, inspired investment, guided policy in the public space, and demonstrated the power of long-term planning. But honesty also requires us to acknowledge that some of its ambitions remain unattained. In several respects, we are still falling short of even the very standards we set out for ourselves. Vision 2030 set a target of Kenya becoming an upper middle income country by 2030. So far, we are off target. This is not a criticism of Vision 2030, nor is it a reason for disappointment. Rather, it is an opportunity to proudly learn from our successes, reflect with honesty on where we have fallen short, and define together Kenya's next long-term vision. The third reason why this is our moment is that the next great wave of economic transformation will, I believe, be African. The world is entering what may become the greatest wave of global economic transformation in the past 6 decades. And for the first time in modern history, its center of gravity is steadily shifting towards Africa. Our continent is the home to the world's youngest and fastest growing population, vast reserves of strategic minerals, immense renewable energy potential, abundant arable land, and rapidly expanding consumer markets. 9 of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa. And by 2050, 1 in every 4 people on Earth will be African. Increasingly, global investors, manufacturers, innovators, and policymakers are looking to Africa not merely as a continent of future promise, but as the next frontier of global growth and prosperity. While we may not take full advantage of the previous 3 great waves of global transformation, we have a historic moment and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, not just to be part of, but to lead the next transformation. We have positioned Kenya as one of the nations that will define Africa's economic rise. Fourth, and perhaps most profoundly, this conversation is potent because the time has come to fulfill not only the political and governance promise of our Constitution, but also its equally compelling promise of development, national transformation, and shared prosperity. Fellow citizens, the Constitution envisages both a democratic and a wealthy and prosperous nation. Democracy allows us to organize power, protect liberties, and govern ourselves. Through our democratic institutions, our laws and policy reforms, we have steadily transformed that constitutional principle into a proudly democratic national culture. The next chapter of our national transformation journey is to operationalize the Constitution's development charter. The Constitution establishes our national development mandate. It requires us to build a wealthy, economically developed, and prosperous nation, and defines what government must ultimately achieve. A nation that is just, inclusive, and sustainable. A nation where every Kenyan, regardless of circumstance or place of birth, has a genuine opportunity to thrive. Taken together, the provisions of our Constitution reveal something profound. They affirm that the purpose of state power is not simply to administer the affairs of state, but to expand opportunity, promote human dignity, create wealth, and improve the lives of citizens. Development, therefore, is not simply a policy preference of those who govern. It is a constitutional imperative for the governed. While the Constitution's preamble commits us to build a nation founded on human rights, equality, freedom, democracy, social justice, and the rule of law, Article 10 of our Constitution speaks to patriotism, integrity, accountability, and sustainable development as among our highest national values. Moreover, our Constitution in Article 43 guarantees every Kenyan the right to the highest attainable standard of health, accessible and adequate housing, and reasonable standards of sanitation, freedom from hunger, and adequate food of acceptable quality, clean and safe water in adequate quantities, social security, and education. Together, we must ask ourselves what these constitutional guarantees should mean in practice. What should an education system worthy of our constitutional promise look like? What should define accessible and adequate housing for every